Hi folks, how's it going? Welcome to Introduction to Criminal Justice. My name's Dr. Lepper, and let's talk about the criminal justice system. So the law enforcement, court, and correctional agencies that work together to effect the apprehension, prosecution, and control of criminal offenders. That's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about that apparatus. You know about these things because you've interacted with them, or you've seen them in TV shows, or you've watched news broadcasts, or you've heard from friends who've interacted with these systems. These parties are changed with maintaining, or they're charged with maintaining order, enforcing the law, identifying transgressors, bringing the guilty to justice, and treating criminal behavior. This is extremely important in a litigious society like ours, litigious meaning based on law. The criminal justice process, you have decision-making points from the initial investigation or arrest by police to the eventual release of the offender and his or her reentry into society. So from capture to release, that's what's going on out there. That's what the process is trying to deal with. It's what the process is instituting in an effort to control or change your behavior. We have to be aware of the various sequential criminal justice stages through which the offender passes in order for us to understand it, in order for us to if we're working within the system, to efficiently do your job. And if you're on the other side, the potential transgressor, it teaches us what not to do. The criminal justice system essentially starts to take shape in the early 1800s. Urbanization in the East and expansion, westward expansion in particular, led to the development of a more criminal justice system instead of just patchwork sheriff's offices that were operating pretty much removed from each other. Westward expansion, of course, includes cattle rustling, train robbing, land wars, water wars. This era produces some really popular characters of lore like Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid. And then urbanization in the East, well, what we're talking about here is the deadly urban gangs, such as the North End Gang or the Dead Rabbits, the Hudson Dusters, all of which operated in New York and Boston in the 1800s and 1900s. These gangs were really prolific and much more organized than contemporary gangs that we see. And they produced a sense of lawlessness and ended up in a public outcry, which results in citizens groups like the Chicago Crime Commission that advocate justice and ultimately oversee criminal justice agencies. Some important dates in the early development of the criminal justice system: 1838 is when the Boston Police Department's formed. 1844, New York gets on board, and 1854, Philadelphia gets on board as well. You also, through the Wickerman Commission, we see the criminal justice system get a major review nationwide, and they ultimately find numerous problems. And at this time as well, the penitentiary system is created to provide non-physical correctional treatment for offenders. This moves into the modern era of justice. We go back and do another review of the criminal justice system in the 1950s, done by the American Bar Foundation. And they find, even though that we've made some steps forward, a disjointed system that was largely hidden from the public and its scrutiny. And they really recognize the need to integrate the components of the criminal justice system. So it starts to work together. We see the development of the FBI at this time as well, and an overall coordination that is taking place in the criminal justice system. And this will have long-lasting impact. As I mentioned, we start to see the federal government get involved in criminal justice. In 1967, President Lyndon Johnson, commissions The Challenge of Crime in a Free Society. This is a comprehensive report of the criminal justice process with recommended reforms. It's important to recall, the context of which, when this Commission on Crime and the Administration of Justice that Johnson's talking about is taking place. This is the 1960s, extremely turbulent time. We have the struggle for civil rights that's been raging since the 1950s and before. We have the war protests. We have the environment. This is a time when our people are pushing back against the norms of society and demanding justice be brought to everyone. Another important date, Congress passes in 1968 the Safe Streets and Crime Control Act. Through the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, this provides federal funding to state and local law enforcement and funded education and research. The Safe Streets Act provided this funding for the National Institute of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice. This organization later becomes the National Institute of Justice. Throughout its history, the NIJ has supported and funded the evaluation and implementation of innovative demonstration projects designed to improve the criminal justice system. The Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, which also results from this Safe Streets and Crime Control Act, provided funding for rural research on criminal justice issues. Eventually, the LEAA was defunded and later became the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Support for criminal justice research from the federal government continues today. The federal government is very, very concerned about how justice is distributed in the United States and how it's coordinated across state lines. And this is extremely important because crime doesn't really care about state lines all that much. And you need to have federal coordination in order to successfully deal with crime. We also moved to an evidence-based justice system. And this is seen in reference to a scientific evolution. The study of criminal justice embraces careful research analysis to support public policy initiatives. So when you start to get the federal government involved, folks, it's going to give money. But when it gives money, it wants to know what's happening with this money. Many of these procedures have been shaped by political goals of the past and need to be assessed by a mature justice system to see whether the programs are successful. That's why we need to do research, because the way they were intended may or may not be the way the programs were intended may or may not be the way the programs exist today. And we always need to revisit and adapt to the changes that need to happen. That leads to the What Works movement, which emphasized empirical evidence gathered using scientific methods. This ultimately determines whether criminal justice programs work and whether they reduce crime and recidivism. There's some unifying principles of this evidence-based justice effort. One, you've got a target audience. Our program's reaching the right audience. Two, you have randomized experiments. And are the random experiments conducted whenever possible? You have intervening factors. What are the factors that enhance or impede program success? And you have a measurement of success, which must be developed and must be seen in light of realistic measures of success, including long-term measures and program retention. This creates a cost-effectiveness analysis that allows the federal government to determine whether it continues to fund these types of endeavors. You also have this recognition that the criminal justice system is society's instrument of social control. It responds to dangerous behavior. It apprehends, adjudicates, and sanctions lawbreakers through its agencies, and it resides in every branch, the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. We need to remember that this criminal justice system is embedded in every part of our being. We are a society that is formed on law. Law tells us what we can and what we cannot do, and when we break the law, the criminal justice system will try to curb our behavior back into the generally accepted legal parameters. The principal components of the criminal justice system are law enforcement agencies that investigate crime and apprehend suspects, the court agencies that conduct trials and sentence offenders, and then the correctional agencies that monitor and rehabilitate the offenders. So the law enforcement's on the front end. The court is the system, the part of the system that receives those that have transgressed against the law, and then the correctional agencies are the ones that are responsible for rehabilitating your behavior over time. The size and cost of the criminal justice system is staggering. $274 billion is spent annually. More than 15,000 local, state, and county law enforcement agencies and 1.1 million officers and some civilian employees. 120,000 government sworn federal law enforcement personnel. 17,000 courts and 8,000 prosecutorial agencies, and 6,000 correctional institutions, and more than 3,500 probation and parole departments. So, this system is huge. And it's huge because it must process an enormous amount of people. Even though the crime rate has dropped, nearly 11 million people are arrested each year. Today, more than 7 million people are under some form of correctional supervision, 2 million of these in jails or prisons, 4.75 million of these on probation and parole. The states now spend $50 billion each year on corrections alone. And the mean cost to house and supervise a single inmate is more than $28,000 in 1/4 of the states. This costs $40,000 or more annually, folks. Those are big numbers. This is a look at the contemporary criminal justice system. This just breaks out the police, the courts, and corrections in a little bit of a different way. So, yeah.